Welcome to A Cup of Happy. I'm your host, life coach, mom, and friend, Nicole James. I'm so glad you've joined me to talk about life and the journey from our past to our future as we navigate the present in order to create our very best life. So grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's chat over a cup of happy. Hi friends, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Happy. My name is Nicole James. Today I want to introduce you to Arielle DeVito. Arielle gets very personal with me in her story about her marriage and relationship and God's saving grace for both her and her husband. I hope that if you find inspiration in her words, that you will reach out to her personally. She can be found on all of her social media and website links that will be linked in the show notes. But without further ado, here's my conversation with Arielle DeVito. Arielle, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm so excited.
Oh, me too. Me too. So we've met only over the phone and on social media. So it's so nice to meet you in person.
Same.
So in this is a series on women who have gone through various traumas and have gone on beyond that and created lives that are beautiful in all forms of beauty. So let's start back because your story it goes back a ways.
It does.
So let's go back to your childhood. What was it like for you growing up?
So I mean, honestly, I don't want to say stereotypical or traditional or anything else, but I had a pretty great childhood. Typical, I even hesitate to use those words, right? Because it's so subjective and relative to everybody's circumstances, but really, I kind of, when I look back on it, I think about it as that traditional family. My parents were together. I'm the oldest of four. We grew up going to church every Sunday, and I just, my father worked hard. My mom was home with the kids for a while, and she went to work after some time, but just a pretty decent childhood. I was a relatively good kid, and didn't really get into the, normal trouble, if you will, until I got into high school, but still considered myself responsibly irresponsible. Yeah. So it was good. And, I think for me, which is kind of relatable to a lot of people, trouble, if you will, or trauma, which, is so hard to recognize in middle school, but that's when it started for me. And
what was that like? When you say it started in middle school, what?
I say, it's unnoticeable, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a normal, childhood, normal growing up. I would say that really I started to notice a shift in 6th grade. The school district, actually, that I went to, 2 small towns, right next to each other, they used to be separate school districts. Okay. And in 5th grade, they merged. So all of the elementary kids that you grew up with, that you knew that you were, they were your BFFs, in 6th grade when the schools merged, all of that changed. It was kind of like going to a new school, but knowing some people. And so I noticed a shift when that happened, that all of the friends that I had in prior to 6th grade, that all changed. And I found myself really lonely and just found myself not fitting into the same circles that I had prior to middle school. Middle school is bad enough as it is. Yeah. Right? Yes. On some level for everybody. Yes. But I just noticed that the friends that I had, I didn't have anymore. And, just really started to look for acceptance somewhere. Yes. And I would say at that point, 7th grade, after spending a year of feeling kind of lonely, and hormones and puberty and all of the things, I started to be attracted to, a few guys who I thought were cute. And it definitely was easier to just have conversation with guys who would allow me to have conversation with them, and just meeting through mutual friends and that kind of thing. Just kind of mourning the death of the relationships and friendships that I used to have, and finding it easier to, instead of hanging out with girls and all of the drama that brought.
Yeah.
Or could bring, right?
Right. Right.
And not feeling like I fit in with any of the pretty girls or the girls who were sporty or any of that stuff. Like, I just kind of gravitated toward the easier option of flirting or, you know, having conversations with boys. And honestly, like, I was a tomboy growing up. I played football with my dad out in the yard. Like, we just, you know, it was easier for me to hang with the guys than it was to hang with the girls. So that's kind of where I noticed things started to shift for me.
Yeah. Now, was that something that was just noticeable to you, or do you feel like your family started to notice?
I feel like it was just noticeable to me.
Just noticeable to you? Yeah.
And I always had more fun with the boys anyway. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, it seemed to be kind of a natural evolution of my personality, but I think a lot of it was fueled by the fact that I just didn't feel like I fit in with any of the girl groups, the cliques. So, yeah, we, when I say we, like, you know, I'm the oldest of four. So, I feel like and at least definitely for me, I felt like because of being brought up in church and not necessarily wanting to get in trouble, you know, like other kids were, you know, partying and starting to, like, experiment with things later in middle school, I really didn't want to be involved in that either. So it really kind of felt like being stuck between a rock and a hard place for a while all through middle school. And in 9th grade, I dated a guy that, for me, like, if relationships were good, I could hang out. I wasn't really worried about dating a lot of people. I wasn't really worried about, you know, I didn't really get bored in relationships. I just figure if it's good, it's good. Like, I got nowhere to go. I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know, you hang out, you date, you go over to each other's houses on the weekends or after school or whatever. And I was with the same boyfriend for almost all of 8th grade, and then had a different boyfriend almost all of 9th grade. And in 10th grade, I really had, you know, the reason I give you that context is because really I had at that point 2 years of not really having any good girlfriends.
Okay.
And so, you know, now it's becoming the normal to be in a relationship. And in 10th grade, I, you know, broke it off with the boyfriend that I had. It was somewhat of a toxic relationship. Not only did he not want me to have other guy friends, but between that and, like, not having any girlfriends, I was over it. I was over not feeling connected with anybody else and only being in that relationship. And so I decided that I was just going to take a break. Yeah. And, you know, do me and enjoy the rest of what high school was going to look like. And I was on stage crew one year for the musical, and there was another, you know, there's a boy there who was also on stage crew, and he just happened to be the guy that I had a crush on in 8th grade, but felt like he was kind of out of my league. Okay. And so I was like, not even gonna try, right? Like, no, it's just not an option. Right. So there was a girl on stage crew who wanted me to ask him if he would go out with her, and I was like, yeah, I'll ask. I've never talked to the guy before, ever. But I was like, I'm going to go talk to him. And, you know, I didn't have a boyfriend at the time. I was single. I was like, I don't even care. I'm just going to go ask. So he said, no, thanks. And I let her know. And just that little interaction was enough confidence for me to be like, do you want to go to the cast party? They have, like, you know, after the theater shows are done, they do this, like, cast party where everybody goes to a house and, you know, hangs out. So that was it. I pretended to fall asleep on his shoulder on the ride home, and we just started talking a little bit more in school, and we decided I think it was June at the end of our sophomore year in high school that we would start hanging out. And that pretty much was it. Like, I've been with the guy since. Wow. Wow. So we have a family. We have 3 boys. We are kind of an anomaly because we started dating in, you know, the summer before our junior year, and found out that we were pregnant our senior year in October, which means that we graduated 8 months pregnant.
Wow.
So it's just crazy. Like, dropping out of high school was not even an option for me. I just knew, like, that was my choice. So, I had to pull up my big girl pants and handle it. Yeah. And walk the halls, pregnant and wearing his T-shirts and things that could actually fit me. And I graduated. I mean, we went to all of the things. Walked the stage with, my graduation gown, and, we went to our senior ball. We did everything that, a typical senior would do besides, go out and party and whatnot.
Right.
And, I'm thankful that he stuck by my side through high school. As we experienced that, as we walked it, he lost friends, I lost friends. And not even that for me, I didn't have a lot of close girlfriends anyway. But it just made it the divide that much greater.
Yes. And
he had good friends, and they were still his friends, but there was no hanging out, right? Like, there wasn't, we had, that camaraderie in school, but after school, it wasn't like, anybody was inviting us to come do anything.
Right.
And, typically, when you graduate, everybody goes to college or goes to work, and, you don't have those connections the same way anymore. But I feel like for us, it was even worse. So after high school, he went to college and decided to work full time. And as the oldest of four, I decided that my parents were basically like, being brought up in church and all of that. They said, we love you, we support you, but you guys can't live here unmarried. And, we have, like, basically 3 younger kids who are seeing what we're saying is okay in our home, and we really want you guys to be married if you're going to live here. And so I didn't know whether or not that was going to be, our story, and how obviously, like, that was my hope. But I said okay, and decided that because my boyfriend at the time, his mom said that I could stay there. And so I moved May of our senior year. So right before we graduated, I moved into their home. And so
Now, how did that affect the relationship between you and your parents, and then you and your younger siblings?
It was actually, so because there's a few years between my sister and I.
Okay.
And because I was the pregnant chick in high school, one of a few, that definitely created a divide between my sister and I. And so she, tended to keep to herself, and I know that it was very awkward for her. As far as my relationship with my parents and with my siblings, I think my brothers were too young to really, like, for that to affect my relationship with them. And I think it was the timing was part of natural progression for, an older high schooler. You're supposed to launch at some point in time, whether you go to college, you go to work, you get an apartment, whatever.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, my relationship with my family, even in moving out, it didn't cause any kind of tension for us. It didn't cause any tension between my parents and his mom. And I really am grateful for that, because as far as supports go, in a situation that was unexpected, unplanned, all of that, like, we really did have a fantastic support system.
That's really unique, I think, even for that time, because, I mean, I'm close in age to you, I think.
Yeah.
And I experienced the same thing. I became pregnant when I was a senior in high school, and so I understand the friends, like, the feeling like there's a big divide there now, and so there's a lot of that part of your story that I can relate to. And I know that my parents, although they wanted to be very supportive of me, it was very difficult. Like, the way that they had been brought up, and like, not only did I bring shame on myself, but on the family, and there was just a lot of hurt and emotion. So for them to be able to offer that support, and there not to be any kind of strife in your relationship is pretty that's pretty special.
Yeah.
It's pretty special.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, with my parents now, they are extremely supportive. And, like, but it was a hard time. I mean, just from the way that they grew up. So I know that they were dealing with a lot of emotions and a lot of outside shame and that kind of thing. So I know that can be something people deal with, which is why I asked about how that was. But I love that they were supportive.
Well, and I think it helped, too. Like, I mean, it's crazy to me when you really, like, zoom out and you think about why we are the way that we are. My mom, her parents were missionaries. And they, I mean, literally, like, as they traveled around, you know, you're talking about generationally, like, timing and all of that, she was exposed to, or, like, I would say exposed to, like, kind of more of a hippie culture, or like teens who, you know, just kind of did what they wanted to, and, you know, troubled teens and all of that. She had a lot of experience with different types of people, and was growing up, you know, as she traveled with her parents, and the things that they did to just be, you know, the hands and feet, if you will, of Jesus, and, like, talk to people. I think her experience was one of the reasons why she was so willing to just be like, well, let's just roll with it. You know, her and my dad both were youth group pastors. They led the youth group at the church I was growing up in. And I think them just knowing that there are so many kids who don't have support at home, I think that was the last thing that they wanted to be for me. When I was like, hey, by the way, we're pregnant. You know, like, we're going to have a baby. So I'll never forget that conversation. But I will say, you know, for the way that things kind of unfolded, even though it wasn't ideal, you know, for any of us, I think that that's very typical, is that you've got to figure out what to do with the cards that you're handed, right?
Absolutely.
As it unfolds. I mean, it's crazy to think about all that.
So let's keep going. Let's talk about how things progressed. So
after
now
that's really where you know, the poo hits the fan, if you will. So all right, so I, at that point, you know, we've got a little baby, and we are, you know, that we graduate in June, we have him in July, and school full-time starts for my husband, well, my boyfriend at the time, in August, and he goes to school full-time and starts working full-time, and I'm living at his mom's house, and we, you know, with a brand new baby, feeling like I'm not going to ask my parents for money or diapers or anything else. Like, we're going to handle our business, and we're going to be adults, because this is, you know, what we chose. And what seemed to us to be the norm would be to spend those years of our lives, you know, going out, partying, hanging out with people, staying up too late, being irresponsible on some level, you know, just to go out and experience life outside of your parents' home and all of that. And for me, it wasn't hard for me to just go, I could take it or leave it. I have no interest. I got a baby. This is my priority. I don't really, you know, need to get high. I don't need to get drunk. I'm not interested in doing any of that stuff, because for me, even as I was, like, you know, going to parties in high school, I always felt responsibly irresponsible. If somebody was being stupid, I would be like, there was that mom instinct in me to be like, okay, I got to pay attention to my surroundings. I need to not be irresponsible. I don't want to be caught, you know, in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. And so for me, it was not a big deal to just say, I'm straight edge. You know, I want to be healthy for my kid. I want to have my wits about me and be responsible. And my husband, boyfriend at the time, didn't necessarily feel that way. He wanted to go out and party. He wanted to go out and be around people. And, you know, he was out meeting people at school and at work, but I was home by myself. So, you know, there was a lot of time that I was just like, look, you need to be home because we don't see you. You're gone at school, you're gone at work, and I'm literally here with our baby. Like, no, don't go out, like, be here. And I think that, you know, when we graduated, there was a lot of disappointment because he actually had received a scholarship to go to a school out of state. Mm-hmm. And my plan A was to go to, we lived in New York, so I wanted to go to Tampa, which is not New York.
Right, like, yeah, no.
So, you know, we were both disappointed because we knew that, you know, we had to give that up. Mm-hmm. And we chose to give that up. And so I think that, you know, there was just a lot of tension in that, and because I didn't want to go out and do the same things that he wanted to do, there was a lot of resentment. And I don't know necessarily, we haven't ever really gotten into it, but I don't know that it was resentment toward our kid, or if it was resentment toward me, or if it was, you know, just all of that accumulation of, you know, giving things up and being disappointed and not having things go the way that we wanted them to, all of it, you know. So we ended up starting to argue more. We would fight more. We would, and I don't even know when it shifted, but we got to the point where he was physical with me. He was emotionally abusive. He was physically abusive. And, you know, I don't know. I never wanted it to be that way. I never thought it was going to be that way. I have to tell you, like, it's so funny, like, I hesitate even to process this and say the things that would initially come to mind to say, because I'm so much wiser now and see things so differently compared to the way I saw them while I was in it, you know? Yeah. So just to, like, say that I've had to walk through, and I don't even want to say we've walked through that trauma and that abuse, the physical, emotional abuse that, to say that that's even possible to walk through and come out on the other side okay is amazing to me. Yeah.
Now, are you willing to share any of those? Any of those moments? Because, like you said, now you're on the other side of it and you're wiser, and you don't necessarily think or process the same way you did back then. But somebody else who may be in the middle of it is going to relate to that, the way you processed in that moment. And so if you're willing to share any piece of that, I would, you know, it's hard. It's hard to hear. But yeah, like what was a night like? Like,
so it just depends, right? So, I mean, you think about, you know, if you're in school full time and working full time, and you have a baby and somebody else who's depending on you at home, that's exhausting before you even walk in the door. Yeah. And on the other hand, if you're stuck in a house with a baby all day in a home that's not your home, and, you know, feeling lonely and overwhelmed and just, like, giving yourself all day long to a baby that, you know, needs everything, like, that's overwhelming, right? And exhausting before somebody else even walks in the door and needs anything else from you. So it honestly always just came down to the day. And you know, when alcohol was involved, if somebody's already tired and they drink at any level, it could be, you know, a beer. If you're tired and you're under the influence of anything, if you're already agitated, like, sometimes that's all it took, is that, you know, if you're just in a bad mood and something triggers you, it's like off to the races, right? And it's like one comment, then another, then two more. And you're back and forth arguing about things that you never intended to argue about, probably at the end of the day, that aren't even a big deal. But there's so much frustration and disappointment and expectation and all of these things that we all carry, like, somewhat independently and privately, you know, whether it's just in our heads or in our hearts, that when that collides, it's awful. And, you know, I can't even recall, like, what would start something off. But it got to the point where it was like, for him, he was the kind of person that he, you know, if the sky was green, there was no convincing him that it's blue. And you know, and everybody else knows, that the sky is blue. But if he says it's green, it's green. And ironically enough, like, I don't know why I have that analogy, but, like, it works to say it, and he is colorblind, which is hysterical. Yeah. So either way, he was just that kind of person that, like, he would say things like, I don't do stupid. So, like, he didn't want to, you know, if your opinion differed in his, like, you weren't going to get anywhere. And for me, being brought up in the family that I was brought up in, and, you know, having some kind of moral compass that I was taught, you know, growing up and how you treat others and all of that stuff, for me it was like, you know, turn the other cheek. Like, give people a chance, give them grace, forgive them. And so I was trying to do that, but also trying to stand my ground and say, like, no, this isn't right. Or, yes, you need to do X, Y, Z. And I had these expectations that I was willing to fight for and stand up for, that, you know, if this guy's green, it doesn't matter what I want, you know? Yeah. So we would get into these disputes and these arguments, and they would get heated, and then, you know, there would be pushing, and there would be more, like, physical contact. And it got to the point where, like, I was getting smacked. We would, like, throw each other around, and, you know, like, I would be pinned down, and there were so many things that I just felt like, you know, it kind of got to the point where it was like, this was the choice that I made, to stay with him when we found out that we were expecting, to hope for the best, to give somebody a chance. He obviously made a choice to stay with me, to stay with us. And there was something in me that was just like, if this is going to be my life, I need to be able to hold my own. I need to be able to stand up. I need to be able to, you know, just hold my ground and be strong enough to at least, like, brace myself for what's coming. I wasn't going to be a victim. I knew that I had a choice just as much as he did. And there was always something in me that was like, I just believed in the potential of him, because on his good days, he was amazing. But on his worst days, if I could handle it, that was a choice that I had to make. And I chose to feel like I got to find a way to be able to handle this.
That's such a hard line to balance. Yeah. Because while, I mean, you're right, you both have a choice. You both have a choice in this matter. And it's one of those things that there are so many people who find themselves in situations where they may not have either the strength that you did, or they may see the potential in somebody or want to, but then that person never makes a decision to do what's right either. And so where did you find the balance of, okay, I know that I have to make a choice and he does too. So how am I going to stand my ground, but where's my boundary going to be too? Yeah. To where I don't allow myself to become a victim. Because it's such a hard thing. Like, I mean, I know so many women stay in abusive relationships way too long because they're like, oh, I see this hope, or I see that there's something, or I don't want anybody on the outside to really know what's going on, and I want to keep the picture of what everybody thinks is going on. And so how did you balance that without, without, how do I even say this? Like, how did you find the strength to find the boundary? And did it take him making a decision as well, or were you willing to stay regardless?
So what's crazy is, in context of timelines, we were even fighting when we lived with his mom, and our bedroom was upstairs, and she would hear us, and she would bang on the downstairs wall. Like, she's downstairs, we're upstairs, we're fighting, and she can hear it, and she'd pound on the wall, and she'd go, "You guys, knock it off!" And when I think of that, because when you talk about how, you want to keep that perception or not let anybody know, what's crazy is that, sometimes the people who know don't necessarily help it. And so I love my mother-in-law. I I really do. Like, I cannot tell you how much of a help and a support she was, no different than my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget her saying one time, you know, I came downstairs after one of our fights and I said, I'm calling the cops. And she said, I don't think you should do that, because if you did, it's going to be his reputation. And he would, you know, essentially have that on his record. And I never told him that until recently, because after we talked initially, you know, it was brought back to mind, and I told him, I said, did I ever tell you that she said that? He's like, no, and why didn't you tell me? And I go, I don't know, I didn't. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, I understood so much more where she came from, because her and her ex-husband had been in an abusive relationship. Mm. And so I just, you know, I understood that, knowing a little bit of her story, where my options were as well. It is an option to leave, mm-hmm. right? It is an option to say, this is, like, enough is enough, and if you're not going to change, I don't deserve this. Like, I can't be here anymore. And I think that, like, and literally, you know, again, context of timelines, right? Like, we lived with her for about a year. We got our own place. We did get married. We had another baby. And when our second son was, I would say, probably close to a year old, mm-hmm. I was miserable. You know, and you're talking time now, and there's about 2.5 years between our older two boys. Okay. So you're talking, you know, about 3 years of physical, emotional turmoil, abuse, mm-hmm. and I had gained a lot of weight with my second pregnancy. I had a thing for Oreos at the time. Like, he was the smallest baby of the two. Like, it was not baby. And I was turning 21 and did not feel good about myself at all. Mm. So between the things that he spoke over me and the things that I started to believe about myself and the way that I physically appeared, I didn't want to go out. You know, I'm turning 21. Like, I don't want to go out. I don't want to be around people. Like, I just was miserable. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't contributing in a healthy way to the potential of our relationship either. I was toxic at that point, because I, you know, was used to the abuse, and I was like, you know, I'm going to give it back, because if this is how we fight, I'm going to be in it, right? They say it takes two to tango. Yeah. It does. So I started to just look for options, because I didn't know what to do to make myself feel better. And I knew that if he wasn't going to make me feel better about me, because at that point in time, you know, I thought that was supposed to be a source of, you know, making me feel good about myself, was my spouse or, you know, my significant other. And I started looking for solutions and came across a flyer for group fitness classes. I'd never done anything like that before, and I started to attend a cardio kickboxing class and stood in the back of the room and threw air punches and, you know, all of these things that just made me feel better. And I started to, you know, get a boost in my confidence, and they had semesters where the class would run for like 6 weeks at a time, so you'd sign up for the whole semester. And I went by myself in the back of the room, and the next semester I moved up a row, and the next semester I moved up a row, and I could just feel my confidence building. Well, there was a couple of times that we had physical fights since I had started taking that class, and when we would go at it, I felt myself stronger. I felt myself be able to hold my own. And it gave me the confidence that I could endure it, because I just felt like it was going to end at some point in time, and obviously I hoped. So, you know, to your question, like, there was never a definitive, you know, I know this will end. There was never an empty promise from him saying, I'm going to change, or I'm going, you know, there was never any hope from him to me that our story was going to be different. But I knew that I had an option to leave if I ever felt like my life or my kids' lives were at risk. And I figured that if the arguing and the physical fight, if I could endure that or get through that, and if we could improve, that I would be committed to at least being strong enough and sticking with getting in shape physically and starting to build confidence on my own and stop relying on him for that. That, if that's who I needed to become to like stick it out, then that's what I was going to do. We had been, we had our second son, and we had been moved out of his mom's house for, I would say, probably a couple of years. We moved 2 more times, and the third time we moved, we actually moved back into the house that we brought our first son home to. It was the house that my husband had grown up in. Oh, wow. It was her house. She sold it to us, and it was like this full circle moment, right? That like we're back where we started. We actually even got married in the backyard because it's like a big, beautiful backyard. Oh, and wow. It's just, it was cool to come back there, even though there had been bad memories that started there. So he would notice that, when he had a drink, like if he woke up cranky, it was enough for him to recognize the fact that the alcohol was influencing how he woke up after a day that he was already exhausted. So, and really, it's crazy to think about it now because, it would be something like, hey, can you help me put the boys to bed? And if he was like, no, that was enough to like, cause an issue. So cause a ruckus. So we had moved into my, what was my mother-in-law's house, the house that he grew up in since he was 8. Yeah. Wow. And we were even still fighting then, but the time between the fights were getting longer. So it gave me hope that things were going to get better. The intensity of the fights or the length of the fights didn't necessarily change, but the space in between was getting better. And honestly, that was enough for me, I think, and him too. Like, I had said that he had gone to school. One of the, and I'm so grateful for this, one of the classes that he took was, he actually went to school for business, and one of the classes that he took was about emotional intelligence. And it was about managing people. Okay. Yeah. And I am so grateful for those courses because it was helpful for him to see some different perspectives. And, when you think about how to get help or where do you go, like we couldn't afford therapy, we couldn't afford counseling. We had supportive parents, but we didn't tell people what was really going on. And they knew what was going on. They knew that it was bad, but they didn't know how bad, right? So, talking about, just to your point of keeping a facade, it wasn't even necessarily that I was trying to hide how bad it was. I just felt like it was nobody else's business or anybody else's burden. And I didn't really want anybody else's opinion because I knew at the end of the day it was between he and I to figure this out. And at the end of the day, like, I didn't need somebody to tell me what to do. I didn't want somebody to tell me, girl, you should leave. I actually wanted to just have, like, the confidence within myself to make good choices. So I think, I don't even know how many years we had lived there, but we had a third son at that point. And we had a fight there one day. And I don't even remember, like, I don't even think it had gotten physical yet. It had started to, like, encroach on that territory, right? Like, I knew it was coming. And he did come at me, and I remember us starting to head down the stairs, and I said to him, if you ever come at me like that again, I'm calling the police. I'm going to make a phone call, and I'm going to get somebody here. And he goes, you probably should because there's never been a consequence. And that was like the nail in the coffin. He acknowledged that he, I think for me, the way that I took that is like there was an acknowledgement from him that he couldn't control this on himself without an outside influence, knowing that he had been at liberty to fly off the handle, he had been at liberty to not treat me well, he had been at liberty, and it, obviously he knew it wasn't right. He knew. Yeah. He just had not enough self-control to like handle his emotions better, to communicate better. And for me, I knew that like I was not going to live the rest of my life like that. And it had already been so many years. So there is, let me think. I can't math right now. So there's like, I think 7 years. Yeah, about 7 years between our oldest and our youngest. We have 3 boys.
Okay.
And, our oldest, like, part of his childhood was knowing that mom and dad fought. And for a really long time, like, he hated, and he would say, like, he hated his dad. And it always broke my heart. And that was always, like, an issue. That was always tension, too, because I wanted them to have a good relationship. I didn't want my son to feel that way about his dad. And my husband didn't really have a close relationship with his dad growing up. So for him, it wasn't like, he didn't have the example, right? He grew up in a household of parents who fought and were physical with each other, so it's like he didn't have the context of how to do better. He didn't have the example or the, anybody coming alongside him. I mean, you think about it, he, after high school, if he didn't have any friends either, and he wasn't sharing with anybody what was going on and how bad things were for him, he had nobody feeding him or speaking life into him or over him or walking alongside him with that. So, like, looking back on all of that, it makes sense to me why it is that things kind of unfolded the way that they did, because we didn't have the resources that we needed to have anybody to come alongside and speak life into us and say, like, you guys can do this different. Yeah. It was kind of like we had to fumble along to figure it out on our own.
Yeah. So what happened after that moment where you said, if you come at me again, and then he said what he said, you probably should. Yeah. Like, what was the next moment like? What were the next days after that like?
So, really, like, it was, for us, the day-to-day, especially when you have kids, one day kind of blends into another. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
Yes. You check the going to work box, you check the cooking dinner box, you just do all of the things. Like, there were even times where, he would work from 4 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and then I would go to work at 3 and work until 11 p.m. And literally they were passing ships. Yeah. So, after having that conversation, it just got to the point where we were able to start recognizing when an argument was headed to that tension. And I don't even want to say tension, really. I think the better phrase is, we knew when things were getting to the place of ineffective communication and old habits. So as we started to navigate the same arguments, we started to recognize better where we were failing at communicating what we needed and what we the expectations that we had for whatever it was on our plate for the day. And so again, like, that's what gave me hope, is knowing that the times in between each argument, the times in between each fight, and I'm not talking like disagreements. Yeah. Right? I'm talking like straight up, like, this is an issue, it's getting blown out of proportion, we're both angry, we both want to speak our mind about it, and we're obviously not going to get anywhere. And it's just, the tension will build and the frustration will build. So we just started to notice that pattern. And what was always leading us to that, because, really, when you talk about, and this is my perspective, when you talk about physical abuse or getting physical with someone, I think it's because we become so physically amped up, there's so much tension in our bodies that we have to release it somehow. And if you can't, I think about a toddler, right? That's what comes to mind. It's like, when they can't say what they want, they're going to throw a fit, right? They're going to have a full-blown meltdown in their bodies because they can't tell you what they need, and nor can you provide to them any kind of relief.
Right.
And so that's where we started to recognize, like, you know, the tension or the physicality, the physical abuse comes like after the emotional hurt. And if we can not hurt each other by communicating more effectively before it gets to that point, and if there are no words, like, you know, sometimes you can't communicate what you need. Like, if you can't clearly articulate what you need in a moment, you gotta take a minute. It used to make me crazy that he would just, like, walk away and not talk about things. But now I recognize that sometimes that's helpful. Right? There's a balance.
Yeah.
Right? You can't go, I'm not talking to you about this, and we won't be revisiting it.
Right.
But sometimes that space allows you to have a clear head and say, this is actually what I'm trying to say. This is what you're hearing. This is how I communicated it the first time. It's not really what I mean.
Right.
This is what I mean. So that's kind of where we started to grow quite a bit, is that we started to just better recognize when we were headed to the emotional abuse, or when we were headed to, like, you can, if you reflect on the fights that you've had in the past, you know how you contributed to it. And so if you can recognize, you know, I think about it like those jabs, right? Like the things that you said to somebody that were unkind, that's just fueling the fire. And I started to be able to recognize how I contributed to making things worse. And I chose to stop doing that, or just, like, biting my tongue, which is hard for me. Like, I want to speak my mind, and I want to say, and I read a book, I want to say, before we moved into the house that he had grown up in. Things were real bad. It was before our third son, and it was shortly after our second son, actually, and he said that he wanted a divorce. And, you know, at conversations after the fact, he said that he knows he was just looking for the easy way out. That's what he wanted. And I had read a book by Dr. Phil. I think it's called Relationship Rescue. And the only thing I can remember from that book is that you can either be happy or you can be right.
Yeah.
And so that was a gut check for me, because a lot of times I wanted to be both. Right? I wanted to be right so that I could be happy. And it had nothing to do with, I don't know, it's just, I felt like things needed to go better so that we could be happy. But the reality is like, you can be happy anytime you choose it. But that's really hard when you want to be right.
Yes.
Especially if somebody else's sky is green and yours is blue.
Yeah. That's so real. Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. Like, I know that there's a lot of things in the media about toxic positivity, and I don't agree with that because I think it's a choice. I think it's only toxic if you're if that's what you choose to see it as. Like, I think that we can all benefit from focusing on the positive, because we have so much negative all the time. It's in our faces, in our lives, and but so let's talk about like now. So how do things look now, and was there anything in particular that helped you in that transition, the resources? So you mentioned the book, so that was a big, like, that one statement, like, helped you a lot. Was there anything else, either resources that you relied on or that your husband relied on, or how did that look, like, navigating that? I mean, obviously you did the work, like, you guys made a choice and you made conscious decisions together, but was there any outside influence that really kind of supported you guys through that?
So I will say I always interrupt myself, because, like, when I say something, there's something in me that's like, but hang on. So I had mentioned that I grew up going to church. I had been in the Bible. I went to church camp. Like, I read scripture. I had context for what a healthy marriage should look like, all of that stuff. And I use should lightly. I had always wanted to just have a relationship, a marriage that we were able to build each other up. What I've learned is that usually one person is more mature and the other person is less, and then you switch. And you actually are helping each other all of the time, like pull each other's weight when the other is low. And there are times, you know, in between that where you're both on the same page. But for us, it was like, I had always had that context of what a healthy marriage could look like.
Yeah.
And I felt like he didn't. That context for me was that thing that kind of kept me grounded, and knowing that there was like a North Star, that there was still like some guidance, a goal to get to, something to keep me on track, and something to, you know, when I wasn't contributing in a healthy way, like a place to get back to, even just for myself.
Right.
And for him, I think, you know, like I had mentioned, him going to school, I think that totally helped him with, you know, learning how to be a manager of people, emotional intelligence, all of that stuff. And reading that relationship book, for me, was like, I'm not a reader. I would rather listen to music or audiobook or whatever. Yeah. So reading that book, though, opened the door for me for understanding that there are books available to us that like can help us along when you can't afford counseling, when you can't afford, and like you say, you know, toxic positivity, like there are a lot of self-help books that really make you focus on yourself. And I think that your life starts to change when you're able to focus on others and less about yourself. Because for, you know, what I've come to understand is that focusing on me makes me prideful. And so then it becomes about what I want instead of what's helpful to someone else. And so, you know, being able to listen to different audiobooks and being able to, I mean, YouTube, right? Like when we were going through the trenches, that was not available.
Yeah.
You know, not at all the way that it is now.
Right.
Podcasts, I mean, there's so many more helpful resources available to people going through this stuff now. And, you know, it's hard when, you know, like we lived in a small town. So it's like everybody's business, you know, if you air out your business, everybody's going to know it. Right. And you don't necessarily want advice from your parents when you're young, right? Or even when you're old. Like it just depends on who your parents are. You know, it just, when you're selective about who you're taking advice from and you can't afford to hire help, it's like, what do you do? Yeah. And so for me, it was books, it was audiobooks, and then it was prayer, and then it was church. And I know people experience church hurt and different things like that, but I will definitely say that when you can meet somebody who really does love the Lord, and like you can tell that they love others well. And I think that there's, like, I have had an amazing relationship with a few people, even over the course of the last, like, 5 years or so, who really have just loved us well. And even if that doesn't mean that, you know, we're both individually taking advice from people that we know, like, we're still seeking resources. Still listening to podcasts. We're still, you know, finding resources that help us to see others instead of just being so focused on what we need, what our expectations are, you know, individually. Yeah. I love that. So what does life look like for you right now? Just crazy. I mean, in all the best ways. So after going to those kickboxing classes, I actually learned how to teach group fitness classes. Because I fell in love with them. Yeah. And, you know, the girl that started in the back of the room became the girl that was in front of the room teaching everybody else how to do it. Wow. And he and I opened a personal training studio. That's a completely different story of how that all came to be, but it did. And I own a personal training business. We offer nutrition coaching and fitness coaching. So I was hired on by the hometown fitness center. They redid their fitness center during COVID, and when everything was closed down, they totally, like, the facility is just beautiful. And so right now I am their wellness coordinator, and we offer personal training and nutrition coaching services through them there. So I work remotely. Oh, nice. Because we got an opportunity to move south, which, you know, 20 years later, he and I both, you know, had originally planned to move out of state and leave our hometown. And we both kind of felt like we got stuck there because we had support from our families for our little kids.
Right.
And, you know, there's value for us in having our kids around their cousins and their grandparents. But it got to the point where we just kind of were ready. Our oldest left the nest. He went and got an apartment and started to adult successfully. And with remote learning and all of that, like, that didn't really work well for our other two boys. And so we were looking and reconsidering, you know, looking at different options. And we went on a trip to take two of our boys to camp. And the company that my husband works for, he was working for in New York. And we stopped by the headquarter office, which was in Asheville, North Carolina. And so my husband he's a hard worker. He has done a really great job in New York, and they said, we'd love to have somebody like you down here in Tennessee. Wow. And they, you know, are looking to expand. And so for him, it was an opportunity to have a lateral move within the company and for us to relocate to warmer climates.
Wow. Yeah.
So both of us grew up in upstate New York.
Wow.
And I'm not a cold weather fan. When I'm cold, all I want to do is nothing under a blanket. And so this, you know, was an opportunity for us where we felt like our oldest son, you know, if he wanted to come with us, he could. If he didn't, we felt confident in his ability to adult without us. And, you know, with the support of our family, like both of our families are up there where we are from. So we know that he's in good hands. Yeah. And I work remotely. So now I go up every quarter to do staff training and see people and do events and that kind of thing. Oh, nice. And he still works for the same company that he's been working for almost 5 years now. So we've got our middle son is getting ready to head to college. Okay. And our youngest son is finishing up middle school.
So your middle son, will he be going to college close by? Or Nice. Nice. I have one that's just getting ready to go to college too, and he's not going too far, so I'm pretty excited.
Nice,
yeah, I'm excited about that. And so is his younger sisters. They're both very excited that he's not going to be too far away.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I want to first of all thank you for sharing your whole story. Before I ask you my final question, is there anything else that you just want to share, like anything on your heart about this at all that you want anybody who may find themselves in a similar situation, or in general, just anything that you want?
I will say, you know, I feel like if I'm not completely honest about my relationship with Jesus, with my relationship with the Lord, like, that has been pivotal for me because, you know, I was actually thinking about how this conversation was going to go, what we were going to talk about before, just this morning, actually. Yeah. And I was thinking about how, like, the words that have been spoken to me, like, I was teased back in high school about having athletic thighs and a ghetto booty. You know, at the time, that was the thing. Yes. I definitely grew up in the wrong time period because, like, there are people getting butt implants. Like, so, like, to have a ghetto booty then wasn't necessarily a great thing, especially in, like, you know, a white town. And, you know, so it's just funny to think about the things that we're insecure about because in some next generation it's going to be the popular thing. Or, you know, when a different fashion fad comes around, the thing that you were like, oh my gosh, why did I ever wear that is now cool. So, like, you know, the things that we speak over ourselves, the things that have been spoken over us, when I was going through that physical and emotional abuse, I really started to identify myself with what was said. And what I didn't recognize until even this morning is that do you remember catalogs in the mail that you would like, instead of going online and looking at all the things, you'd flip through the catalogs? We used to get catalogs at my house growing up that were like lingerie catalogs. And it was, you know, obviously for my mom, my dad would look at it and he would make comments from time to time about how my mom used to be, you know, so hot and gorgeous and all of the things before she had kids. And I had, my mom had gotten toxemia when she was pregnant for me, and then 3 more kids, right? So it's like she never really lost the weight that she had gained. She struggled with toxemia for, you know, with me. And that was one of those things, before I even had my oldest son, I already had considered my worth as a wife and as, you know, a mom, as whatever, that like if I didn't have an attractive body, that my husband may not find me attractive.
Yeah.
Right? You've got all of these like big boobed, you know, skinny waist
Yes.
women in these catalogs. And as a kid, like, you know, I wasn't even thinking about it when he was saying those things. And I'm sure he wasn't thinking that it was going to be a seed planted in my heart of insecurity. But the fact that he made those comments when I was trying to figure out who I was as a girl, right? Like, as a woman, like who I would become, and then end up pregnant, feeling like, okay, well, now I've got to combat gaining weight and maybe not looking attractive, right?
Yes.
Like the motivations for my body, my worth, the things that, for me, the things that are in scripture that are spoken over me as a daughter, as a child of God, as complete, as, I mean, his workmanship, and that he formed me the way that I am, like all of those things I've had to come back to, I can't tell you how many times, because of things that I've believed because of what somebody else said. And to have that reiterated and like solidified in my heart because of my husband's immaturity at the time is so much to have to work through. And being involved in the fitness industry, like
I'm so teared up because I feel this so deeply.
If I could just say one thing to a woman struggling with who she is and her value, like shame and guilt do not belong in your vocabulary. They just don't. They don't belong there. You are so much more valuable than what you look like, than what somebody else speaks over you. And so, like, your crying is making me tear up. So, I really think that at the end of the day, like, you gotta know who you are. For me, I gotta know who I am in Christ. Because I get really caught up in how successful I am, you know, contributing to my family financially, what value I bring to them, if I'm doing a good enough job as a mom, like all of that stuff, right? There's so many things that we think about. We obviously are our own biggest critics. But it's because of the things that have been spoken over us, or the things we've believed, our experiences. And I just really want to encourage women that, like, you do have options, right? You do have choices to make. And really, if you can develop your worth in things that have nothing to do with external circumstances, like that's where your peace, your hope, your joy, like that's where it comes from. It's an inside job.
Okay, I'm going to just throw this out there. I had no intention of bringing this up either, but you just talked about worth, and you just talked about the fact that, like, not finding our worth in external things. And I have just literally began reading a book called Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima, I believe is her name. Do you know who that is?
No.
Okay.
No.
So she's this this woman. I've heard her on a couple of different podcasts, but are you familiar with It Cosmetics?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'm just getting into the world of, like, makeup.
So I wasn't really familiar with it. Honestly, I kind of maybe heard about it, but not a lot. But I really listening to these podcasts because over the last couple of years I've become a podcast junkie. Like, I love them. But so basically she was this lady who when she started out very young, she was a waitress at Denny's, and like that's like the story that everybody wants to tell. She was a waitress at Denny's, and then she wanted to go into broadcasting, like to become a news anchor, and she had such bad eczema on her face, a rosacea, that they were talking in her ear, like asking what was popping, because like her makeup was coming off as she was speaking. So she developed, basically, long story short, a makeup brand in her home, and her husband like basically went through all of their savings trying to get it developed, became It Cosmetics, and then after being told no so many times by so many people, literally there was a man who was the CEO of a major makeup company and was like, no, because like people aren't going to buy because of the way you look, like your weight and all this stuff. And she ended up going on to sell, I believe it was to Maybelline, for $1 billion.
Amazing.
And anyway, so she speaks about worth and self-worth, and she's very open about like her faith in the journey and that being a big part of it. And so that's a great resource for anybody to check out too. It's this book called Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima, and it's just, I believe it was just published and just put out this year.
That's awesome.
So that might be, you might find that interesting. But that's something that I've definitely been exploring too, is just finding my worth in who I am. Like, I was made for a purpose. I was made for a reason, same as you were, and like just kind of discovering that and learning how to be okay with that, learning how to be okay with what I look like and my story. And that's, so I'm getting a little emotional here, but that's really the whole premise behind this whole platform.
Yeah. Is
just to give people an opportunity to share their stories and their stories of hope. And I did not plan on getting emotional, so I'm so sorry.
No, don't apologize.
Yes, but I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bringing that up.
My heart, with everything that I've gone through, like, I mean, I can't even tell you, like, my motivations for staying in shape have changed. Mm-hmm. They've morphed.
Yeah.
I no longer am that insecure girl, like, looking for, approval of my husband. And I will tell you, too, like, the comments that he used to make are not the same comments that he makes now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, like, my hope is that people can find others to evolve with and to grow with. Mm-hmm. And that's why I love that we connected, because it's like, if we can have an opportunity to find people that can speak life into us, I believe that there are so many of us who are just living below our potential and below, like, really who we've been created to be without the external validation, right? Like, if you can get into who you are and the impact that you can make by connecting with other people, like, that's, vulnerability is like the bomb.
Yeah.
It's
it really is. It really is. I love that.
And I'm thankful for an opportunity to sit down with you and to talk about it, because honestly, like, where else am I talking about it?
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
And to know that my story can help somebody else and that somebody else can relate to it, like, that's crazy, because for so long it felt like I was so alone.
Yeah.
You feel like an island.
Yes.
And to know that, like, that's not forever it just gives you so much hope to know that, like, no matter what you go through, if you will be willing to be brave enough to be vulnerable, like, you can help so many people.
I agree.
So cool.
So all of your information, I want to link it up in the show notes, but tell people real quick, because I do have one question for you at the end, but where they can find you. And of course, I'll put it in the show notes as well, but just let them know.
I don't want to make promises yet, because I'm starting to get into the world of TikTok, but I might be.
It's a hard world to get into. Yeah.
But until then, I do have a website for my business called BeMoreThanFit.com.
Okay.
And I'm on Instagram at Arielle _DeVito. I have Facebook, and I have, business pages. So I've got, the Be More Than Fit Life. It's the BMTF Life for Facebook and Instagram. So that's, lots of ways to get in touch with me.
Amazing. I'm so grateful that you were here. One question, though. I believe that it is really important for us, especially as believers, but in general, just as humans, to work on building a mindset that serves us. I think it's our responsibility to renew our minds. I think that we're told to renew our minds, and that sometimes we think that that's just maybe something that will happen to us, but I feel like we have to like take action and do it. And sometimes it's the smallest little things that can make the biggest shifts in our minds. So one thing that I love to do is to every single day find 3 things to be grateful for that happened within the last 24 hours. And these typically are not your big overarching, you know, the big 5 that everybody wants, you know, their health, their life, their marriage, their, you know, all of those things, which are great, but focusing on the last 24 hours really is that fine-tune point that really helps us to acknowledge things in the every single day that we can be thankful for. So I'm going to ask you if you can think of 3 things in the last 24 hours that you are grateful for.
You know, I used to be so good at, like, gratitude journaling every day, and I haven't been doing it in a very long time. And as you were saying that, I was like, I know she's going to tell me. So, oh, man, you're just going to make me think. Okay. What was yesterday? I am grateful for being able to sleep in. I actually have had to start putting my phone, I set my alarm on my phone, and I have, if it's close, if it's within reach, I'll hit snooze and stay in bed. Or if it's on the other side of the room, I'll hit snooze and then get back in bed. I've actually had to move it outside of my bedroom.
Oh, wow.
And, like, get out of bed and out of my room. And I've been religiously doing so at 5 a.m. So yesterday and today, I actually did not set an alarm. And I am very grateful to have been able to, like, rest until I woke up.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's a big one for me this week.
Yes.
Second thing, you know, we're new to the area. My youngest son is in middle school, and we've been attending a church. And with my middle son getting ready to go to college, just getting a new job, he hasn't necessarily gone to youth group like as regularly as he had been, and my youngest son has gone with him. And he hasn't wanted to go recently. And it kind of bums me out because I want him to go, like, meet people and make friends and get connected. And he actually found out about a weekend camp at a different church with friends from school, and we were able to register him literally last minute, and he's been gone all weekend whooping it up with his friends. So
that's so
very
good.
grateful for him to be able to do that. And then lastly, I'm actually really grateful. My oldest girlfriend bought my family a Nintendo Switch for Christmas.
Oh, okay.
As, like, a gift to everybody. Yeah. And my husband and I have been playing It Takes Two.
Okay.
And we got to play it, and I mean, we have, you know, my middle son worked a crazy schedule yesterday, and so we just had some one-on-one time.
Oh, that's so nice.
And have been playing video games together.
Yeah.
And so it's a new chapter.
Yes.
Right? Like,
right.
It's really cool. We're getting used to having less kids and less responsibilities, and I'm sure maybe it's grandkids one day, you know, down the road, and I'm like, can we just enjoy, like, where we're at right now? So thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. Arielle, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, despite the tears. Yeah. I really did. And I'll put everything in the show notes, but thank you so much. Yeah, and I hope we stay connected.
Yeah, me too.
Beyond here.
Me too.
Thank you.
Yeah.